Cleora, Oklahoma is a rural community in the northeast part of the state, not far from the banks of the Grand Lake of the Cherokees. Here, the Adams family lived during the 1966-67 school year. It was Dad's first job as superintendent of schools, having just completed his master's degree in school administration at the university. And it was a small, 8-grade school system. It was a stepping stone position, one that he could cut his teeth on, where expectations were low, yet it was a job that might serve him to gain valuable experience on his journey up the ladder of success. Mom was employed too, hired to teach both 3rd and 4th grades. The time spent here would be merely a footnote on the Adams family timeline, but there are many memories that remain. Lynn and Keith both attended school there during that year. Lynn was a 6th grader, on the precipice of puberty and teenage rebellion. Keith was a young 4th grader, interested only in matters of childhood imagination, and given to what his teachers described as daydreaming. Eric and Alicia were both too young to attend school, though young Eric would have been of the age to attend kindergarten had the school system offered such a program. Because both Mom and Dad taught school all day, a babysitter named Louise was retained to look after the young ones and tend to their daily needs. She was a heavy-set, middle-aged lady who, by all accounts, seemed capable and trustworthy. And over the course of her 9-month employment in the Adams household, she would earn every penny she was paid. It was an unseasonably warm and sunny day in late January. The kind of special day that beckons children outside to shake off the effects of cabin fever one contracts from endless, dreary winter days spent confined indoors with nothing to do. Louise had just finished feeding the children a lunch of bologna sandwiches, though Eric had his sandwich without the bologna. He was notorious for his finicky eating habits, as he seldom ate many things that his mother called nourishment. But no sooner had the last bite been taken, young Eric was out the door to enjoy an afternoon in the pleasant weather, leaving Louise to clean up Alicia and the dishes. Now, sometimes the excitement of being outdoors can be manifested in strange ways, especially after eating. As he ran about the yard, he was suddenly struck with the urge to defecate. He thought about going back inside, but the feeling came on so quickly that there was nothing to be done but the business at hand. Fecal matter began filling his jeans at an alarming rate, so much so that the first turd began sliding down his pant leg. He shook his leg a few times, and a well-formed chocolate-brown log emerged from the cuff of his jeans and plopped onto the straw-colored grass at his feet. He looked around guiltily, wondering if anybody had seen it, as he took a few awkward steps towards the house, his pants still filled with stool. About that time, Louise opened the door, holding Alicia's hand as they toddled down the 3 or 4 stairs that led from the house into the yard. What a beautiful day! Louise seemed just as happy to be outside as Eric had been a few minutes earlier. But now, the horror of her presence rained down on him like the rays of golden sunshine that enveloped them. Young Eric was at a loss of how to proceed. He wondered if he should tell her about the load in his pants, or if he should try to deal with it himself. He made his mind up quickly and started walking as normally as he could toward the door. "I'm going in," he mumbled as he started up the steps past his sister and Louise. Once inside, time was of the essence. He immediately began disrobing on his way to the bathroom, as chunks of excrement fell to the beige-colored carpet. He did his best to dump the majority of the contents from his pants into the toilet, but it was apparent from the outset that this was going to be a big job. He washed his underwear out in the sink before depositing them along with his socks and jeans into the laundry basket. He grabbed a washcloth and cleaned himself before doing the best he could to wipe the feces up from the carpet. It was a futile undertaking, as brown stains now adorned the carpet, as well as the washcloth. After doing the best he could, he hung it up to dry on the towel rod and went to his bedroom to don new clothes. As he looked back at the living room on his way back outside, he deemed his attempt at cover-up passable, but the foul stench permeated the house. The fresh outside air was a welcome sensation to young Eric, and he was glad to have put the incident behind him. It wasn't long, however, before Louise noticed that his clothes had changed, which prompted a curious query. "Why did you change your clothes, Eric?" Stunned by the question, Eric's rebuttal was slow in coming, as he searched for an answer that might put an end to the interrogation. Finally, after deliberating for what seemed like minutes, he decided to tell the truth. Kind of. They were dirty." Eric thought how he had just rendered the perfect response as he glanced up from his downward gaze, trying to determine how his explanation was being received. Her eyes squinted as one of her eyebrows raised, and she looked at him discerningly as she pieced together the elements of his story. He began to doubt whether he had chosen the correct alibi. She looked toward the door and then looked back at Eric. "Come on, Alicia. It's time to go back inside now." It was not what young Eric wanted to hear, as he ran to enter the house first, stepping in front of Louise as if to block her passage. His guilt was now in full evidence, as she reached over him to turn the doorknob, and the three of them flooded into the living room together. He held out hope that maybe she wouldn't notice the smell or the mess that he had left behind. But when she spied the messy carpet, he knew there would be nothing left to do but confess. "What is this on the carpet? And what's that awful smell?" "Eric, did you have an accident? Why didn't you come and get me so I could help you?" He stood there, ashamed, not offering any resistance to the questions. He took her to the bathroom, the dirty washcloth stained with feces still hanging on the towel rod where he had left it. He watched as Louise began rinsing the cloth and followed her to the living room as she cleaned up the spots on the carpet, standing by in silence as she continued scrubbing the stains, lecturing him about asking for help as she worked. Alicia joined the fray, innocently holding her nose and saying, "Poo-poo," and "accident," as she continued amusing herself amid the excitement. It only served to humiliate him further. The next weekend, the dreary days of winter had returned, leaving only a memory of the sunny day when Eric had messed his pants. But the day was not so dreary as to keep Keith and Eric from kicking about in the yard. It wasn't long before they came upon the turd that had slivered down Eric's pant leg and rested itself on a neat tuft of straw. Keith was struck with the impressive size and shape of the log. "Wow! That must have been a big dog to crap that turd." The dung had impressed Keith, and he was proud of his deductive prowess. He took a stick and poked it, hoping to gain some insight as to what the dog might have eaten. And after a while, he used the stick to fling the poop toward the boundary of the yard, never to be seen again. Young Eric never said a word, as they continued to explore the wondrous world around them. There are certain universal truths common to all Americans, things we all love, like fireworks, hamburgers, Christmas, and sports cars. They all fall into this category. And as a child growing up in the baby boom generation, the annual airing of the classic The Wizard of Oz was not to be missed. Who can forget the song Dorothy sang as she leaned against the haystack and pondered Toto's fate before running away to protect his freedom? It is a song one 5-year-old boy named Eric loved. It was the spring of 1967 in rural Oklahoma. Dad was superintendent of schools at a small dependent school district called Cleora. His duties as superintendent did not preclude him from teaching class, however, as he was charged with teaching the 5th and 6th grade classes. Mom also taught there, overseeing the 3rd and 4th grade classes. This arrangement was the closest thing the Adams family ever had to homeschooling, as Lynn was a student in Dad's class and Keith was a student in Mom's. Eric and Alicia were still preschool age, and they spent their days in the custody of Louise, the babysitter who sat with them 5 days weekly in a house a mere 50 yards from the schoolhouse. The house was the property of the school district, but as a perk, the Adams family was housed there throughout Dad's tenure as chief operating officer. There were actually 2 identical houses sitting side by side. The other housed the school bus driver and his family. Isolated by expansive farmland, they were the only structures in the area, besides the school and a Baptist church, which sat out on Highway 85. The end of the school year was upon them, and as was customary, there was an end-of-school party to celebrate the students' achievements and hard work. There was cake and ice cream and games to be played. Of course, Keith and Lynn had vested rights of attendance at these festivities, but since this was the final day of school, Eric and Alicia were allowed VIP access to each of their parents' homerooms. It was really nothing new to the smaller children, as they spent a lot of their time visiting their parents and roaming freely throughout the building on numerous occasions, such as roller skating in the gymnasium and attending basketball games and other school functions on a regular basis. The 5th and 6th grades were taught in the same room by Dad, and the total number of students couldn't have been more than 20. The same was true for Mom's class of 3rd and 4th graders. It was mid-morning when young Eric poked his head into his father's classroom. The children were showcasing their talents. One girl was playing Moon River on her flutophone. As the girl finished, a few people clapped, and another young girl got up to read a poem she had written. Young Eric wandered freely about the room, happy to be a part of the proceedings. When the girl finished reading, again there was a smattering of applause. Then, Dad introduced young Eric. And now we have a young musical prodigy. He will sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Come on up here, Eric, and sing for the class. Lynn's face flushed beet red at the prospect of his little brother performing in front of his peers, and there was a sudden murmur of anticipation that saturated the room. Young Eric walked to the front of the room and stood front and center as he began to sing. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high. His voice rang clear and precise, as the children sat listening, obviating their approval with their silent attention. Lynn was hiding his face, discernibly abashed by his brother's limelighting. He had heard young Eric sing it 100 times at home, and to have to listen to him sing it in public fell somewhere between misery and torture. Eric continued through the song, not missing a word or a phrase. And when it was over, the class spontaneously erupted into appreciative applause as Lynn looked up to see young Eric basking in the glory of his moment. Lynn's embarrassment melted into a sea of pride when he saw the enthusiasm with which his performance was received. It was welcome attention to young Eric, but a monster had just been created. Mom's class of 3rd and 4th graders was busy doing artwork when young Eric entered the room. He was hardly noticed as he proceeded to the front of the room. He stopped at a spot front and center, and with a loud and clear voice, he began to sing. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high. The students all stopped and looked up at young Eric. Keith looked bewilderingly at Mom's startled face. The confused students all looked around at each other as Eric continued, singing proudly about the bluebirds and the lemon drops, this time adding hand gestures to further animate the song. But at the end of this performance, there was no applause that he expected, but rather comedic laughter, not only from the students, but from his mother too. It was not that the students hadn't enjoyed his performance, but laughter was not the kind of attention he felt his rendition of the song warranted. As quickly as his star had risen, it had faded away. There would be other occasions for young Eric to sing. He would sing numerous times at church with his mother and with his brother Keith at his sister's wedding. But never again would he feel the excitement of a crowd the way he did on that spring day in 1967.